Good evening, all. There's a bunch of you guys pouring in here. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Obviously, we got Zach Fehrenbaugh and Aaron Warbriton from the Hunting Public here to talk about finding new places to whitetail hunt. Before we jump into that, we're just going to let some folks roll in here. So, Zach, I know it was a long, frustrating spring for you being hobbled on your knee. But Warb, what were some highlights from spring turkeys?
Mississippi was a really good time. We started out down there taking a bunch of kids out for a youth season, and that was really fun. That was one of my favorite parts of the whole spring. And I got to hunt with my stepson, around where I grew up. That was a good time. And then we went on a northeast swing in mid-May for like a week to 10 days or so, and that was really fun. We got to hunt. Yeah, we hunted with a bunch of our buddies out there and got on some birds, and it was rough in spots, but it was a blast.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I recall correctly, that stepson hunt, he was on the gun until he wasn't on the gun?
He went pretty much. I mean, he was on the gun for like an hour on this bird that was drumming just out of sight, and I'm a head taller than he is, sitting up against a tree, so I could see the turkey. There was two longbeards and a hen strutting at like 40 yards. We'd crawled up to that close and couldn't really get any closer with two of us out there. And he's like squatted down, in between my legs or right off to my side. We set up on this thing like multiple times, crawling on him. And every time he got set up and got his gun up on his knee, he could not see the turkeys. And he's still small enough that he can't really lift the gun up and shoot it freehand. So I couldn't get him to stand up and shoot. I couldn't get him to get up on his knees and shoot. He really needed to be in that sitting position where he's locked in, and he's got that gun on his knees. But in order to do that, obviously you got to sink down, and you can't see your visibility is limited. So I'm watching these turkeys the whole time, and like he's getting fidgety and uncomfortable. And finally he's just starting to get real frustrated. And he's like, hey, I have him wearing these earmuffs, the noise canceling headphones, because we're worried about shotgun blasts in his ears. And, when we were kids, we didn't, who cares? But now with them, it's probably a smart thing to be wearing them so that you don't damage your hearing permanently. So he's got those on, but he can't hear the turkeys drumming with those things on for whatever reason. And I can hear him just drumming loud right out of sight. So I'm like, man, they are right there, but he can't hear him. He can't see him. Occasionally he can hear him gobbling, and he's just getting impatient. And it's been an hour and he's a kid. So that's a while. And finally I was like, do you want me just to crawl up there and see if I can shoot one of them? He's like, yeah, you go up there. He said, I want to come with. I'm like, okay, well, if we get up there and I can get you the gun before they run or fly, we'll do it. But we got up there the whole time he couldn't see him until like the very last few seconds. And they were running off at that point. And I had the gun up on my shoulder. I'm like, Miles, they're getting out of here. They're spooking. Like they're putting, they're running down the ridge. And I got the gun up, and then he said, oh, I see him. And about that time, the last one walked through my opening at 45 yards, and I shot him.
All right. So it was an encouraged gun switch. That's good.
He'd been three times with the gun, and like I never took it. We had multiple encounters with birds inside of 30 yards, and we didn't get them. And he was just ready to get something on the ground. He didn't really care who shot it.
Totally get that. That's
he was jacked when we got it.
Well, our buddy Lake Pickle, when he took his wife out turkey hunting for her first turkey, the first turkey they killed together was Lake snatched the gun out of her hands as one was getting away in the hardwoods. And so I was half hoping for more of a story along those lines, but better this time for Miles. Awesome. Well, we got a bunch of folks in here. So guys, we're going to be covering planning an out-of-state deer hunt. First, Warb is going to kind of go over their deer school, why they built it, and why you guys should be utilizing that tool to really help plan and strategize your whitetail hunts. And then we're going to get into the map and kind of talk about what these guys are looking for when they're traveling all over the country to places they've never been and consistently finding success. So with that, if you guys have questions you want me to facilitate to them, please put them in the Q&A. I'll do my best to touch on as many of these as possible throughout the webinar. And if you just want to generally, shoot the bull, the chat's a great place to do that. So, I'm Bob from South Carolina, talk about the bucks you got on trail camera, your turkey seasons, whatever you guys want to chat about in there. Just keep it cordial. And with that, I'll kick it over to you, Warb. Oh, and there will be a giveaway. We are giving away a seat to THP's Deer School, as well as the merch package from those guys. And so about halfway through this webinar, we'll drop giveaway links. You must be in attendance in order to fill out that link and get entered to win. So with that, Warb, if you kind of want to touch on Deer School and give folks a look at it and kind of a taste of why you guys built that, let's kick it off there.
Yeah, for sure. We've been working on Deer School. I don't know. It seems like 3 or 4 years now, Zinger. Just off and on. And we basically, obviously, our mainstay is our YouTube channel, right? That's where most of y'all have probably seen our hunting videos at. But we can't really, on the YouTube channel, we have a hard time getting into massive detail on like all the tactics that we use, the planning, the strategy, and all that. We try to get into as much of that as we can while still keeping it entertaining, but we needed a place where we could put just pure educational content. So we built the Deer School for that on our own website, where we have full control over the content and how it's organized and everything. And it's taken a really long time, and we're constantly adding to it. In fact, we're creating a bunch of content right now. Like, we're going out in the morning to shoot a bunch, like 3 or 4 new videos for Deer School, which is on farmland terrain. But that's the main premise that we created Deer School, was so that we could have basically this entire educational library and this online course that you could go through and learn about every aspect of what we do when it comes to DIY whitetail hunting. And then there's also state summaries in there where we talk briefly about our experience in various states. We also go into depth on the hunt breakdowns, which is where you can really learn a lot of in-depth stuff that you don't necessarily get in the hunts from YouTube. Where we dive into successful and failed hunts, and we talk about them in in-depth detail, every little thing that went into it. And the situations are very, very different and dynamic, ever changing. So we talk about that a lot. But yeah, do you want me to talk about that first chapter, Jared?
Yeah, I would just
kind
like,
go through how,
you're down, just like give them a look-see at what it, the look and feel, and kind of how you guys break it down into the different chapters, because it's built in a very consumable fashion. I've been through the whole thing multiple times at this point, and there's just so much in there to learn. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give an onX Elite plug. So if you're an Elite member, you get the planning your hunt chapter, as well as the scouting chapters for free, as well as a 20% discount to the whole course. So.
Yeah. And as you can see, we got lots of different chapters in here, and these are all chapters and topics where we get lots of questions from folks. But the planning your hunt chapter is where we start, and we ask a bunch of really important questions within this chapter. Basically, this starts from scratch. For every individual, you have to set goals for your particular situation. Everybody wants to shoot a big buck. That's a given anymore, but some people are not in a good situation to do that. So we talk about all different kinds of things in here, and I'll kind of get back to the questions. That's how we frame the entire course, is we think about what are the most frequently asked questions we get about each topic, and then we frame the videos and the content within Deer School around those questions. So like question 1 here, what is your goal for your overall experience? Do you want to harvest a mature buck, or you're more interested in the quality hunting experience regardless of the size of the animal? And then we go into different things to consider with mature bucks, different factors involved there that you need to consider whenever you're planning your hunt for that given fall. Mature bucks are a major time commitment for one. Like you're biting off a lot if you're trying to hunt for a mature buck in your particular area, and you're going to be putting more pressure on yourself to deliver. And if that's not something that you're into, then just go and hunt and have fun. We do that too. So there's no real right or wrong answer. It's just figuring out what your goals are. And then question 2, how much time and money do you have to hunt? And we break this down into hunter examples. I think that's a good way to look at this. And there's a video there where, old Slinging Rick's on there with a nice buck from Wisconsin. But we go in and break these down into 3 different hunters. And I won't get too far in the weeds on it, but the basic premise is your average hunter, each one of these 3 hunters has got 10 days to hunt all fall. But their 10 days are allocated differently based on their circumstances. So like hunter number 1's the weekend warrior. They can go every weekend, but they can't go during the week at all. And they can go a total of 10 times. Hunter 2's the vacationer. They can take a week to 10 days vacation and they can use up all their hunting days all at once, but they can't go any other times. Hunter 3 is the flexible worker. So they can still hunt only 10 times in a given fall, but they can take off work quickly. They can jump out of work early for an evening hunt. They can see a cold front, for example, coming in the weather forecast, and they can go to their boss and say, like, look, I'm going to take off this Wednesday morning, afternoon, and Thursday morning to capitalize on this cold front coming up. Whereas the weekend warrior can't necessarily do that. They're forced to hunting on Saturday and Sunday. But the point is these are all questions that you need to ask yourself whenever you're planning, because you have to treat each one of these scenarios a little bit differently in your strategy when it comes to actually hunting. And we got more questions down here beyond that. Seasons, weapons, traveling or hunting near home. All of these things are stuff to consider before you even start to dive in to finding even a place to hunt. You got to figure out all of that stuff right out of the gate.
That was an awesome synopsis. And I know, like, just from my personal experience, starting with your end goal in mind is not something that comes natural or really comes easy for most hunters that I know, 'cause as you said, everyone wants to harvest a mature buck, but that's a lot of times setting yourself up for failure. So beyond all that written content that you guys saw, I mean, I calculated at one point, but I mean, there are hours worth of supplemental video modules within every chapter of Deer School. So the amount of information you guys put in there is pretty spectacular. So anybody in this webinar that's planning a unfamiliar hunt to them, I couldn't recommend Deer School highly enough. But with that, Zach, if you want to share the map, and let's dive into kind of the things that you guys are looking for when heading to a new place.
All right, let's do it. Also, somebody said, don't be so serious. I was looking at the map, so that's why I looked so serious. I was sitting here staring and kind of had the video in the background, but let's see here. Share screen. You guys got it?
Zach Fehrenbaugh started sharing screen. Oh, there you go.
Perfect.
That looks like a nice piece of public land.
It looks pretty interesting to me. So I guess I spent there some minutes looking at a bunch of different stuff, and this one caught my eye for several reasons, but I guess I'll just start by talking about why habitat wise. The first thing is this area in general, I mean, public and private, looks like there's some hills, but there's also some low-lying areas with water, and that's pretty common a lot of parts of the country. And if a piece has both, that's a good thing. And another thing that jumps out to me, just as far as the shape of the land, you can see up here in this northwest part of the public area, there's not really any road connected to that. But also, if you look at the middle of the piece throughout the whole thing, from the very north end to the very south end, there's this water in there. So that's
permanent water.
Yeah, and that's probably going to make it pretty hard to get through, would be my guess, from east to west. So those things jump out to me to start. But I also like,
and Zach, elaborate on that a little bit. Like, why does that jump out at you from an access standpoint, from a habitat standpoint, from a combination standpoint?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is access. Like, there's not access or the availability of parking right up against every boundary of this piece, which there's tons of parcels across the country that you could pull off anywhere because there's a road that goes through the middle of it and there's public on both sides, where this piece in particular is pretty interesting. And it's definitely not to say that we won't hunt a piece that has public on both sides, but I do like areas like this. And I would say we're always attracted to areas that have limited access to them. And a lot of times I would say that's the very, very start, is looking at access. And one thing that I have pinned here is just where one spot where the road touches the public boundary. Now, it's important, I think, to make as many notes as you can of where these places may be. And there, I've got a new tool that I've been using that's new to onX that I'm excited about. It's something that I've already used in my map scouting sessions late at night as I'm not able to sleep because I'm not burning enough energy because I got a bad knee. But I'll show you guys kind of what that looks like. So I just recently, well, onX just recently has gave you the ability to use this route builder. And how I use the route builder, I don't know if this is right or wrong. I don't think there's probably any rules, but this is how I've been using it. I'll take a piece like this, and it has this snap to. If you go, it gives you the options here. Snap to, it says points are connected to known locations. Paths between snap points follow known roads. That's what I always do. I use that snap to. So I'll just click once, and then I'll just kind of click my way down through a piece of public, and I'll just make a border to confirm where the roads are that I would be able to drive on. And then I'll even use that to kind of test potential routes. Like, for example, right here, it's like, oh, could I drive in there? You know, this little spot right here. And then if my route builder doesn't go to that spot, then I can, know that there's probably a good chance that's not actually an access point. So a lot of times I'll just start by putting a border around it with that route builder, and then I'll change it to some obvious color that I can see really well. And I'll just save those a lot of times. And then, sorry, I'm not going to do the survey right now. But that's something that's something new that I've been doing, and I really like it. I mean, you can obviously do that really quickly. Gives you a really good border, and sometimes it just helps, at least for me, see those roads where there's times where there's enough lines and stuff on the map that it can be a little bit confusing. Like, for example, just right next door here on whatever this piece is, there's so many lines right there that my brain gets a little confused when I look at all the trails. And obviously you can turn layers on and off, but it just helps me be able to see all those lines still, but have the roads pop a little bit. So back to this piece, then just going through and just marking potential access points. And I always just straight up put a pin on there, mark it with a, mark those with an A. So I don't know why I can't see that right now.
More.
There it is.
More.
So I'll just mark those with an A. And then I guess as I'm doing that, Jared, I'll kind of answer your question a little bit more.
Well, yeah, and I have another one for, if you got more on the access or the habitat stuff, go for it.
Well, the biggest thing with the habitat that I was going to mention is and I know Orb and I've talked about this a lot of times on the webinars that we've done in the past, is just the habitat diversity. Like, if you zoom in here close, you can see that while that's pretty wet, there's also some different vegetation. It's probably pretty marshy down in there, potential for things like cattails. A lot of times, whatever this is right here is pretty good thick bedding habitat if it's not too wet. And it's just another escape for deer. It's also another barrier especially something like this particular spot where you've got this pond here. It's also just a barrier for humans. And I think that just gives deer some comfort. You add a little bit of terrain in there as well, and mature forest where there's likely some oaks and stuff. You're just
Zach,
having that diversity.
go into the map layers and flip on some of those tree species and wetland layers just so people can kind of visualize what that looks like. And I know you guys use that sometimes.
Yeah, so I actually don't use the
trees, crops, and cover.
The acorn one is one that I have not used enough, but I just saw on Jake's map and I was like, what do you have on your map? And he was like, oh, this is the acorn layer. And I was like,
yeah. And so
I guess
what
I
that
really ought to be doing that more.
is all those little red squares you see. I believe red is red oaks and then yellow is white oaks. But this is a layer that in each of those little red boxes is a 30-yard by 30-yard area. And that is showing you the predominant tree species in that area. And so if you click the details there, Zach, under any of those, whether that's wetlands or acorn producing oaks, it's going to tell you, woody wetland versus herbaceous wetland. Herbaceous is going to be like that cattail stuff. Woody is going to be more that dogwood, alder, that type of stuff. So in this case, you can see it's mostly woody wetlands. And so like these layers, I find them invaluable just to kind of understand and find the habitat diversity that these guys so often speak to.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times too, and I think I've just made, this is why I don't use it enough probably, is I've just really focused on color change. And I've also I know we've mentioned that before too, where it's like, if you look at this particular spot right here, there's a whole bunch of different colors that come together all the way down by the pond, the buffer between the timber and the pond. And then even once you're in that timber, you can see that there's some different colored trees. And a lot of times that means that there's some variation in the timber type. So I think that's just kind of the habit that I got into for so long that I haven't utilized these tools enough, but definitely going to start doing that.
Right. Well, this couple layups here for you that you should have been expecting. Buck bedding. How can you use topo to locate likely areas of buck bedding and funnels? And then, what does buck bedding look like on a map typically? I know you mentioned the one wetland area, but what else you got?
Warb, do you want to go for it, or do you want me to?
We probably both can, but when I'm starting out in an area and trying to figure out where bucks bed, sometimes it's just not right in your face, just looking at the map, having never set foot there. So what I'm looking for is kind of back to where Zach almost started. What places are hard to get to? Where are the barriers at? So he's talking about that pond up there being a barrier. Well, if you cross that pond and then you head west of that and go up and over that ridge, then you get into that creek bottom back there and you get into some steeper terrain that is really difficult to access. There's no road. It's a very secluded area. Even from the private land, it's secluded. And that's what I'm looking at from a buck bedding standpoint. And then once you get in there and you put boots on the ground, you find these little subtleties in the terrain that where bucks could lay up and be bedded. I mean, there's that one spot there on that west edge, Zinger, that's kind of flat on that little point.
Yeah, right.
It comes down. Yep. It's down there near those marshes and stuff. I mean, they might be right there, they might not, but I'm basically doing a process of elimination, and I'm taking probably 70% of that area and I'm crossing it off. With that said, you can't overlook the stuff that's really, really close to the accesses, that's really, really close to the road. The stuff that has the fewest numbers of mature bucks in it, it seems like, especially in places with a lot of hunting pressure, would be something like in between your top A pin and that buck pin you just laid down, Zinger. It's like that stuff in between those two is probably getting walked all the time. I wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about that, but I might think about something. Yes, right over in there, in the edge of that marsh that is close to the access and potentially overlooked. maybe right behind that house or something. I mean, there's spots right there along the edge of the road that, you know, there may only be a acre or two of land there. But if people are walking past that and it's relatively thick, that might be a place where you can intercept one at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, once you start blocking off the map though, and taking away those big chunks, a 2,000 or 3,000 acre area doesn't seem as intimidating to you anymore. You
Yep.
start having a better plan of action whenever you go in there to hunt, because you're not trying to figure out 4,000 acres. You're only trying to figure out, you know, the 150 over here, or the 5 acre chunk right here next to the road.
Mm-hmm.
And then you drop, you know, points of interest all the way around that thing, and then just go check A to B.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation of that. I feel that the barriers in this particular location is really what's going to probably catch our attention the most, and that's the water. I mean, these hills aren't so intense that they would keep everybody out. It might keep some people out, so that's definitely a factor. Like, for example, we talked about going up and over this ridge and back up this one. Like, that's getting far enough away that might be a factor. But even then, you're still having to cross this creek down here, and we can tell right here that's probably going to be pretty challenging. Would be
it looks wet. Looks
Yeah.
like that could, you know, who knows, that could be knee deep, that could be waist or neck deep in spots.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which honestly, the harder that it is to get back there, potentially the better it is for you, because deer will go across stuff like that with, you know, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
They might not go across the middle of that cranberry pond if it's 10 feet deep in the middle of it, but that creek over there with that slough, those drainages coming off of it, they'll go right across those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even right here, if you really zoom in, my guess is some of these are deer trails going through that stuff. Like that right there is very likely a deer trail. And I feel that as far as buck bedding goes, it's not that I feel that over time with our experiences, it's not necessarily that there's a perfect formula for finding where bucks like to hang out, but there are tendencies, and sometimes it just takes covering that ground, checking those areas, seeing if there's sign going in and out of them. And factors may change that too, like hunting pressures, the one that we've talked about a lot. But I pinned this up here on this ridge just because if, for example, the deer could lay on this high point and watch back towards the road and look at this field where there may be people accessing frequently, but then still be able to bail off into the wetland habitat down on the bottom. If there's acorns dropping in these oaks right here, you may be laying right on the top of that ridge facing back towards the access, not all that far away from the, from where that pressure is coming from. So that's just one of those things. I feel like you have to kind of chip away at seeing different examples and then just go check and
sign
see.
Will tell you sometimes.
Yeah. It's like a lot of times you just have to create a theory and then go investigate
test it.
Theory. Yep.
And so with that's a great segue into a couple other questions here. How highly do you guys regard your e-scouting like this? Will you drop a point of interest with a tree stand icon and be like, I am walking into this spot on the first day and like it looks really good on the map, I'm checking it out? Or, do you guys take the approach of let's cover a bunch of ground after we know a piece is interesting on the map and dial in the specific area once we get there? How do each of you individually kind of go about breaking that process down?
I probably do a little of both. Like there'll be spots that you drop that icon on or whatever, and then you're like, I am going to check that out, and that's one of my top ones. But we're never married to it. Like if and when we're headed towards that spot, or we're cruising around and doing a perimeter check, like what Zinger showed a while ago with the route, And we start seeing some other things that may not favor that spot. Like, for example, we might think that back corner there's killer. But if we get there and we realize, like, oh, wait, there's an access path through here that we weren't aware of that people are coming in off private on, well, then that acts as that plan in a way. I mean, or it changes things. So you got yes and no. You got places in mind that you want to go to, that you want to check out. But that was one of the mistakes that I used to make, is I'd get married to it and I would be like, I am going to that spot because that's the furthest back there and that's going to be the hardest for people to get to. And then you get there and there were some things that you missed that impacted it, and it made it way different. And the opposite could be true also. You know, you could get there and realize that acorns are dropping like crazy and the oaks are right next to the parking lot, and that's where the feeding area is. So you got to think creatively about how to hunt those deer near those thick bedding areas. It all just depends. Mm-hmm. But I would say I use a mixture of the both of them.
Mm-hmm. I'd say the biggest thing that we both do is drive those perimeters and just confirm, like, because you may see more pressure than you thought. You may realize that, like, for example, this one pops up to me a lot. You might go past this one and be like, okay, absolutely nobody is ever parking here. And there can be a number of factors that's true, whether there's just not enough room for a pull off, or maybe, there's a guardrail there and you can actually pull your vehicle off and be on public land. But then you come over here and there's an obvious pull off, then you maybe check that out and investigate how much hunter sign is going in and out of that area. But I think that the cruising around is something that we all do that a lot, and is something that I think we value more and more every year, because like Aaron said, we used to dive into spots sometimes that I remember thinking about spots all summer long, and then not even, really being in the game in those areas most seasons, if not every one. I mean, there's so many times I can remember just every night I'd go to sleep, visualize this one spot being so good, and then you'd go hunt it and it's just like, well, that sucks, and you'd spend all this time and effort committing to that theory when you never really even took the time to go check the theory. So, like, a lot of times, I mean, really, this sounds pretty weird, but I do in some situations spend a fair amount of time map scouting, but I also like just rolling up to spots and doing it day of, and just going through this and just being like, okay, right here, let's go look right here, let's go look right here. And then once you make those drive around the area, confirm you want to hunt it, then it's time to go check out those pins. But even then, you might just pull out and bail and go to a completely different area and start from scratch tomorrow on day 2 of the hunt. But I feel that
you may repeat that exercise, though, that you're talking about, Jared, over and over again through the course of a hunt. Mm-hmm. Like, you may have your initial guesses, and then on the first day, you learn all these things that you didn't know, whether it be minor or major things. And then that night in the tent or in the back of the truck or the motel or whatever, you're making more guesses. And you're adjusting your pins, and you're deleting stuff, you're adding to stuff, you're making notes to access pins, all of those things as the hunt progresses, and looking for similar locations. And as you do that day by day, you start to narrow in on what's going on in that area.
The map becomes very obvious, right? If you're dropping all those pins and you're tracking these missions and figuring out where you've been, where you haven't been, it starts to become very clear on a map, the areas of focus. And I do want to touch on just the one thing that you guys have always preached beyond habitat diversity is not getting, too excited for your hunt that the first thing you do is go set up a stand and sit in it. That's something that you guys taught me a valuable lesson in is, burn the first day or two without ever even hunting, like get familiar and scout and put boots on the ground. And that's been a super valuable lesson in my experiences over the last number of years.
I guess along those lines too, I feel that something that I've got a little bit more confidence in than when we first started traveling to hunt is And I guess even the very first time we left for our true first out-of-state deer hunt, this is what ultimately happened. It's like, don't be afraid to just completely up and change all plans mid-hunt, because sometimes that just puts you into a hot spot. If you're having a gut feeling saying, like, for example, let's say we commit day 1 and 2 to driving around this piece and picking away at some of these potential bedding locations. And we learn more about, okay, if we look at this exact location on the map, and then we put our boots on the ground, we're going to know what vegetation is really growing there, what water levels are, if acorns are dropping up on the hills or not. And then we're going to be able to take that information to other areas too. So like Aaron was saying, when you get back to wherever you're staying after the hunt and you're looking at the map again, you're going to start to have these gut feelings where, hey, I've seen this look on the map before, and this is what it looked like then when I put my boots on the ground. So it seemed like they were using that. This area has more of that. Don't be afraid to just pick up and move. I mean, at times, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe even just to the next piece of public land or the next ridge over. But I feel that not being afraid to just dive into something totally different and follow a gut feeling is a pretty good thing. It feels weird sometimes because you're like, oh, I've committed all this time to this other area. But one that comes to mind for me right now is in Minnesota. I made two separate trips there. And the second time I went back with Nick, we didn't even hunt the piece that Keith and I probably had the best action, saw the best sign in, because we just kind of went with a gut feeling and went and kind of cruised around some different areas, ended up seeing a bunch of action, and we hunted there. And that's where we ended up almost getting one and then getting one. And I feel that sometimes just doing that on the fly and just going with your instinct is also important, but all of the steps lead you to that gut feeling, if that makes sense. Maybe that's too I don't know, too
Very
deep.
philosophical. I like it. All right, so we're getting a lot of requests to look at some flatter terrain. So I'm going to ask Warb some conceptual questions that have come in while you zoom over to Oklahoma or something.
Okay.
All right, Warb, how concerned are you about scent when you're walking around and scouting different areas?
Not overly concerned. Definitely not concerned about how I smell, but I am a little bit concerned about ground scent. So if we're scouting ideally we're scouting into the wind or into a crosswind or something as we're approaching areas of interest. That way we're not blowing out the areas with our scent on the way in. And like when we're going from A to B, we are walking fast and not really paying much attention to it. But if we start running into good sign and we're getting, if we're starting to get that birdie feeling like a dog, whenever they smell the quail in front of them, that's what I always equate it to. When we start to get that feeling, we're running into fresh sign, we're getting into an area of interest, seems like there's deer here. I pay attention to the ground scent. Like, if you're going to try to set up on that scrape that's 20 feet in front of you, do you want to walk up to that scrape and gom around it a bunch? Probably not. I mean, you want to think about, before you do that, think about how you're going to set up, and can you set up anywhere around it without walking up there and putting your scent in it.
Do you take any precautions besides, just being cautious? Are you wearing rubber boots? Do you use any drags behind your boots with dough? Nothing.
Nah, I'm not saying that stuff doesn't work sometimes. We just don't really mess with it a whole lot. Like the deer scent thing kind of interests me a little bit, but we've had such little success with it. Occasionally under very specific situations, it's helped us in some small way. So I'm not discounting that it can work, but a lot of people swear by drag rags and stuff during the rut. I just don't have much experience with them. I just
All right.
don't. I'm more focused on that hot sign and where he's at right now, and trying to be there when he walks out.
Now, is there anything that will trump hot sign for you? The question was, after settling on a tract of land, is there ever a situation where you'll ignore hot sign for a terrain setup or something different?
If you see him,
Yeah, I was gonna say literally only a visual.
yeah. If you see him and there ain't a lick of deer sign anywhere around, well, you should go wherever he is. I don't care what the sign says elsewhere, really. I mean, but I don't know, Zinger. Is there any time when that?
I don't think for the way that we hunt. I think that from listening to other extremely successful hunters that hunt in different styles, I think that there are probably places that when I look at it from a different perspective and more of a setup and weight type of style, I think there probably are places that you could do that at, but I don't do that enough to have enough confidence to tell you what that is, even if that makes sense. Like there's places you could probably do it, but I don't think that we have that style necessarily.
I think it's really, really hard to do on public land. Like, as you said, Zach, like there's places that come to mind immediately on pieces of private that I've hunted in the past. It's like that funnel or, that gate we keep open in a fence, or things like that come to mind. But
but that's because you're manipulating the human pressure.
Correct.
Like nobody's been in there. Well, of course, deer are going to use the path of least resistance if they haven't been hunted or pressured, or they're used to you coming and going. But on public land where that's all out of your control, then I would say one extra thing on hot sign. If it's in like a feeding area and there's a bunch of hot sign that is real accessible, we don't pay as much attention to it. Like we pay attention to hot sign, but not all hot sign. Like it has to be in the right situation.
You're sending yourself really down a deep rabbit hole here, Warb.
How far do you want me to go, buddy? I mean, we'll be here after dark. But yeah, I mean, we may look at hot sign near a feeding area and then think about where that deer could be laying at that particular moment, and then hook around the back of it and set up on a spot with very little hot sign. But we're still making that decision based on that initial sign, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure does.
We're not just going to bail on it completely if it's in a decent spot.
Last conceptual before I'm going to assume Zach has a flatland spot to look at. When do you typically start your scouting if you have the luxury of pre-scouting an area before, the day you show up to hunt it? Are you confident that sign in June is going to matter come September, or are you kind of just waiting until a little bit closer to get in the woods?
I'm more interested if I haven't been there and just walking the property. Like sign is great, and you're looking obviously for places that deer like to hang out, but I'm more interested in just getting there, figuring out where the main access points are, how deep these creeks are. Can you, like that example Zinger had a while ago on the map with that permanent creek that was like pretty marshy? Well, I don't know how deep that thing is. I have no idea if I'm going to need hip boots to get across it, chest waders. I'm going to have to swim, jump on a beaver's back. I don't know how I'm going to get over there until I get down there and I look with boots on the ground. So I'm more interested in that type of information at that initial stage than I am even deer sign. Because that's stuff that if you know in advance, you can start to form a plan around.
Makes sense. All right, Zach, you got a flatland spot to look at?
Oh yeah. All right, here. All right, so I came across this area and just now realized that as I was running my little route builder here, we've got one access point, which is pretty unique. At least without driving around it. I mean, maybe you could over here, but this says private and looks pretty private drive. So that's one where you drive around it a lot, but I feel that this is a pretty unique habitat type and terrain type, and very flat, big river bottom as well. So certainly is going to have some fluctuating water levels on depending on the year. And I guess in these situations, I would say the starting point would just be looking at lines a lot of times, like looking at edge.
Transition, edge. Yeah.
And we've hunted a ton of areas very similar to this, and really like hunting areas like this. And they can seem monotonous at times, but I feel like to just help speed up the process, just focusing on those edge or transition lines, like Warb said, and like Warb said earlier too, you're going to eliminate quickly a ton of ground. So like, for example, there's a giant section right here that maybe at some point I would pay attention to, but as of right now, I got no reason to even bat an eye at any of that. I wouldn't personally, but over here, on the other hand, now we're talking about some potential, some stuff that be probably worth diving into on the map, and then ultimately kind of creating a foot route to go check off some spots. But another thing too, in a river bottom situation, and obviously we have the permanent water here, but if you look closely at this area, there's going to be some probably low depressions here. Even right here is another good example, and that's just an additional transition line. But I also really like these a lot, whether the old river bends.
Hey, Zach.
Oh yeah.
Flip on 3D there.
Oh yeah.
And then use that exaggeration slider and kind of show people what you can do with that to really break into the terrain. Maybe hop back.
And this is a super cool tool. It just helps so much, especially when you've got more terrain than this piece. But like right here, for example, you couldn't see that before you had the everything exaggerated. So you can see as we go way back down, it's kind of hard to even notice that there's terrain there. But as you use that exaggeration tool, bump it way up, you can start to see how much it falls off right there. So really right around the
flip it to satellite once so folks can kind of see like how the terrain actually changes from aerial perspective.
Yeah. So you can see here that kind of everything up to the west, it's high ground. I mean, right here, they've got some sort of alfalfa or ag, maybe even a little food plot right there. But everything then down here below drops off. And I think that it's kind of hard to tell, but I'll bet there's even a little bit of a difference in a spot like this, where there might be a foot or two difference as well. So those are all transition lines and like starting points, I would say, in something like this. And I feel like it's almost easier just to go to like questions that anybody would have, unless Warb, you've got anything else that jumps out at you.
I just was gonna circle back to what we were talking about a while ago. Like, you're looking at all these little sloughs and basically these intermittent creeks that weave within this marsh. Like, I'm more interested in knowing if those, how deep's the water in there? Can you walk down those sloughs and not be detected? You know, and then getting in there and just putting your tracker on and covering ground, and understanding all of those little features. And then once you get that understanding, you can, and while you're looking at that stuff, you may start running into deer sign and things of that nature. But that, all of that information is going to help you when it comes time to access and get in and out of there. Because we have no idea, having never been there before, if most of that's underwater or not. I mean, that could be ankle deep water across a lot of that. Now, that may not matter. There may still be deer in there on little high spots and whatnot. But I'm looking at all those little details the first trip in, for sure.
Yeah, and it could be a situation too. And this is what's so fun about public land, and kind of why we always end up, not always, but oftentimes end up pretty vague, or like say, it's situational. Like this is area that could be dry as a bone for 6 years in a row. And then on year 7, be completely different, and every tiny little low-lying area's got no chance for deer bedding in it. They're all pushed up onto high ground. So, variables, different factors change things very quickly year to year. But, generally speaking, place like this, just looking at those transitions to start. And then, like Warb said, I think just going and getting an idea of what the status of a piece like this is.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing that you guys haven't mentioned that jumps out to me is, Zach, you said there's only one access point when you zoom out, is like, is there an opportunity to put in a John boat or a kayak from upriver or downriver somewhere from a boat ramp?
Totally. Yeah. That's another thing that's worth map scouting as well. Like, you might come up here and find that you can put in right here probably where there's a boat ramp. So, a lot of times when looking at a new area, I'm pinning all these things. And like, for example, I think that's where you can really go pretty in depth with your driving around a piece of public land, because while we're not even close to this piece of public land, if that's a boat ramp that we're going to be using every day, it's totally worth driving up there and checking it out and just getting an idea all around, what's going on. And I think that, that's one advantage of a lot of these wet areas or wetland areas. Even that property that we were on previously, you might be able to, on some years, get a canoe or a kayak down some of those little marshy creeks. And I think that just opens up a huge opportunity as well.
100%. All right. We just dropped the giveaway link in the chat. We're going to drop it again here. So make sure you click that link, fill it out. It's only going to be live, I believe, for like the next 12 hours. So if you don't fill it out now, you're going to be out of luck. So get entered to win a seat into THP's Deer School, as well as that merch package. I think you guys have pretty well covered the map here. I can hit you with some conceptual questions and we can wrap it up here in a few minutes. So would y'all rather hunt bottomlands like we're looking at, or something that are, more timbered ridges, and why?
I kind of like both. I don't really know if I knew you knew I was going to say that too.
I did. I almost put a caveat in saying you got to pick one.
I don't know if I could pick one or not. I like both. They offer different challenges. Just like what Zinger said a while ago. Sometimes when we're struggling, we bounce to new areas. Whenever we do that, like, I get so much more confidence because I'm back to having fun. I'm back to exploring.
Fresh.
And you're fresh. Like, you're going in fresh. You're going to make some mistakes or whatever, but you don't know anything at this point. So you just go off intuition and see where it lands you. And then you learn from that point and move on forward. But I love looking at new stuff. I feel like, you can learn a property and you can become really good at hunting it over a long period of time. But if you just continually hunt that same property, your knowledge about deer hunting on that property is going to be second to none. But everywhere else, some of that may translate. But the more different cover types that we hunt, the more we learn about deer and how adaptable they are and how many different, places they live. So it's hard for me to pick, man. I don't know. I like both. There's advantages and disadvantages to both.
Zach, do you got a good answer for the people?
I think that I personally have enjoyed the challenge, and this is not, I don't think this is for everybody, but I enjoy the challenge of ridges currently. I feel that hunting the bottomlands is something that is just, for whatever reason, it clicks a little bit more. Hunting ridges at times and hunting bigger hilly mountains, whatever, it's just hard and it just pisses me off a lot of times. So that's kind of why I like it, So as far as like, where's my confidence? River bottom. Where do I enjoy currently? Hills. So I don't know.
Love it.
But ultimately the same as Aaron.
Glad to see you're keeping good care of them teeth there, Zach.
Like a nervous habit,
so
really.
if you see a tree stand set up on public ground in a particular area, let's say it's near some hot sign that you are also really interested in, how does that affect your next day's hunt?
Depends on how fresh the tree stand is. Like, are the straps kind of worn? Has it been hanging there for a couple years? Is it brand new? Do they have like a brand new set of beef sticks going up the side of the tree? Like the guy was just in there in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are all questions that immediately come to mind. If the sign is hot and the deer are in there and you don't see any like fresh people sign, like boot tracks, then it may be worth hunting there. For example, if it's the first week of season and you haven't even got to opening weekend yet, and you go in, creep into a spot, and you run into you find no boot tracks in the mud, nothing, and then all of a sudden you run into a hot sign and you look up and there's a stand right there, and there's some old pull-up ropes hanging off of it. It's obviously a stand somebody hunts every year that they've left up on public, whether they were supposed to or not. It's there, but there's no boot tracks leading to it, and there's hot sign right there. I'd be tempted to hunt right there, because who knows when that thing was put up. If it was put up 6 months ago or a year ago and nobody's been back to it since last November, that's 10, 11 months ago now, and nobody's been messing with that tree stand. So that hot sign might trump it in some ways. But if there's people sign in there, then yeah, I would have some pause.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel that there's some places that, actually a lot of places that we've hunted over the years, where it's like, if you're gonna not go into a place because you see a tree stand, then you're not going hunting.
You're not going to be going into very many places. No, yeah, like we've seen big bucks and shot big bucks like real close to tree stands.
Yeah, and
I love seeing an old tree stand, especially one that you can tell is old, because typically it's in a pretty dang good spot.
There is though to Aaron's point though, or what he said earlier, it's like if you can tell that thing's fresh. Like one time this past season, or past off season, I guess. So a year ago in February, I was scouting with my buddies in this new area, and we got back to this back corner that we were super excited about. Not necessarily a particular spot, but as I started getting down in there, I started feeling like, man, this exact spot's really sweet. A lot of things came together, transition lines, and I just stumbled across a tree stand that a guy had definitely just put up, like definitely had been in there a couple of, days or a week prior, doing the same thing that we were doing, winter scouting. And he found a good spot and put a stand up, and I probably will never put the effort to go back into that spot, at least for the next couple of 2, 3, 4 years, because he was definitely going to be in there that fall, So that's a situation where, and just an example of where it's like, beat me to it. See you later. On to the next.
The tricky thing that I'm running into just in the last couple of years is the cell cameras.
Yeah.
Because guys can go out there with cell cameras now and put lithium batteries in them that last for like months and months. Some of them you can hook a solar panel up to. And we're seeing cell cameras in spots where we would never see a regular camera because they're too intrusive. So like guys know they can go in there in middle of summer or in the previous off season, and they can put a cell camera in the middle of a bedding area, and then they never have to touch it again until they get pictures of a buck in there, and then they can go in there and hunt it accordingly. Those have been tripping me up just in the last year, more than tree stands.
Better head to Kansas.
Yeah, I guess you can't use them at all there, can you?
No, sir, not at all. All right, last question, and then we'll bid adieu here. Any scouting considerations that you consciously think about if you're scouting for a gun hunt versus a bow hunt, or pretty much same?
That's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
I would say like to a certain degree, visibility. Like for example, if you're trying to pick between, picking a spot, for example, between being over here and only being able to shoot 30 or 40 yards. But if you move another 10 yards, if you can add more shootability out of it, I would say that's something that I would consider. A little less worried about like specifics of wind, more just big picture wind too. Like, okay, if for example, if we got a southerly type wind, we can get way out on this point where it's elevated, we can see a bunch, shoot a bunch, and we don't need this very specific perfect wind where you do with a bow. I would say that's kind of a couple of things that jump out.
Yeah, you can fudge the wind a little bit with a gun. We've done that several times where we've been, 100 yards from them and the wind is real close and there's no way you're getting close enough to shoot them with a bow, but you can kill them with a gun. One thing I would say, and this is not in every scenario with a gun season, but often we're hunting escape with gun hunting, or we're hunting, the backside of pressure or whatever. We're hunting pressure, or we're monitoring hunting pressure with bows as well. But with gun hunting, especially if it's like an opening day situation where there's going to be way more hunters in the woods and all of a sudden these things are just going to get blasted every which way, we're looking for back corners that deer are going to be using to escape and thinking about how we can get in there before the Orange Army does, and then use them to our advantage to push the deer to us. Whereas in bow season, that deer drives and stuff like that aren't occurring in that same way. Yes, there's pressure, but it's harder to catch deer on escape, with bow season. So that's one way I would think about it differently from a mapping standpoint beforehand.
Definitely.
Is there any depiction of a map in your mind right now, Warb, on what constitutes an escape?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, if there's a bunch of security cover on private land nearby or in a spot that's really difficult to access, we might not push all the way into that thing during bow season. I mean, we might get around the edges of it, but during gun season, we don't care how many deer we blow on the way in there before daylight, because they're getting ready to get thrown in a blender all day and all weekend. Like, we don't care. We just want to get there before everybody else and get right up against that sanctuary where they're going to be running off of public and onto private, and kill them as they're escaping. Say there's a marsh or something in a thick little band of cover that's leading onto that sanctuary on private ground. That's just one example, many, but that would be a really good spot. If you're set up there and then all of a sudden they start pushing deer around at daylight, or even mid-morning, midday, bullets start flying, they're just gonna, who knows what they're gonna do. But they're probably gonna try to get the heck out of there. I mean, that, especially a mature buck. Sometimes they'll lay low, but hunt and escape has worked really good for us during those gun seasons.
I would say one last addition to that too is if you're to the point where you're in the middle or the end of the season and you're hunting public land or any pressured land for that matter, I talked about being able to see and shoot a lot, but that changes as the season goes on sometimes at least. It might get to a point where it's like you're really looking for those places that you'd almost be as well off with a bow, where you can only shoot 20 or 30 yards just because that's the only place they're going to be at all. Like they are going to probably leave the open forest. So you might just be focusing in on those super, super dense areas on public land. And a lot of times, just simply put, cover that you can't see through. Cedars, oak trees, young oak trees that still have their leaves, cattails.
Place where you can't get a stand.
Yep. Clear cuts.
I mean,
stuff like that.
In Missouri with rifle season, they come out of the woodwork because it's right in the middle of the rut, and they get lots of non-resident tags, just OTC. So everybody's sitting on a high point, or a big ladder stand or whatever. And that's not the case everywhere we go. But you get down there, like Zinger's talking about, towards the end of it, and you get in a cedar thicket with a bunch of short cedars and you can only see underneath them, you can't get up in them or anything like that, those things are full of deer. And you can't hardly shoot them with a scoped rifle in there. You got to pack a little 45-70 or something like that, that you're planning to shoot deer at self-defense, you know. But
I'll be prepared for the next episode of Hunting Prone for 4 hours with Warb.
well, just sitting down there real low, like, you know, so you can skip one off the ground at him if you need to.
Love it. Well, Zach, Aaron, greatly appreciate your time and the knowledge you have shared here. As does everyone else. Lots of thanks in the comments. The giveaway link is in there. We're about to post it again. So if you haven't clicked on it, you better click on it in the next 20 seconds. And with that, good luck to everybody this fall as you're getting out there. Get out, hanging trail cameras, get scouting done, and enjoy the process. So, Warb, Zach, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. See y'all.